and welcome back to the Boropolis podcast. As usual, I am joined with Nathan, and, well, we all expected it, didn't we? Coventry 3, Middlesbrough 0. The definition of bogey side. Just like Bristol City, we thought, surely we can put an end to this weird little hoodoo that's been going on. Unfortunately, we haven't. And I'm sorry to say again, for anyone listening, it's probably going to be a downbeat podcast again because, God, it was difficult watching that yesterday. Nathan, I will ask how you are in general. I know that you did have a little trip away to Manchester for a friend's birthday. So I'm just going to ask you about your night firstly and just forget about the football for a minute or so.
Well, yeah, I had a good day out yesterday, to be fair. Last week we discussed about our Coventry supporting friend on the podcast. So met up with him yesterday before the game, and yeah, I got the bearable version. You were out with him last night, so we'll see how he was last night after full time. But I got the bearable version of Alex yesterday before the game, and then went out in Manchester last night, and it was just nice to forget about the result very, very quickly with a good few pints of Guinness.
Yeah, I mean, I won't repeat what Nathan messaged me later on in the evening, but it was words to the effect of, I'm going to drink an awful lot to just forget about what happened today. And I think we both had the same idea, to be honest. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people had the exact same kind of mindset, leaving the ground or switching off the stream, whichever way you tuned into the Middlesbrough match. It was one of those defeats where you do think, God, I need a drink as soon as possible. I mean, the drinking could have started during the game because there was a feeling of inevitability about it once Hayden Hackney had been sent off. But we'll get into the game in a little bit. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that you had a good night and that Middlesbrough haven't completely ruined your weekend, because I'm sure they have for a lot of people. Yeah, Nathan, I mean, where do we start? Injuries, that's always a fun topic. It's interesting in this modern sort of day of social media that, and I mean, don't get me wrong, there's always been leaks and there's always been little tidbits of information that gets passed around like Chinese whispers or whatever. And usually back in the day, it would be a conversation or a text, and it would be, oh, this is the team, or so and so is not playing tomorrow, or you'd see it on a forum. Now, Friday night, and there was rumours circulating around Twitter that Rav Vandenberg was going to be out of the team and was in a knee brace of some sort. It's one of them where you just cross everything that actually it's one of those made-up rumours, it's second-hand information or fourth-hand information, and basically it's something that's just been misconstrued. When the team come out, there was that bad news and there was confirmation of that bad news. There was also more bad news because Ben Doak wasn't in the team. Obviously, Rav wasn't in the team. And yeah, I mean, it was a double blow, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, just not ideal in the slightest. Think I first sort of got wind of it on Thursday about Rav, and I messaged you, and sometimes I'll just send you the odd text to wind you up and just make something up, and you'll have a bite at me, which is quite funny.
I do every time, especially at the moment. When Middlesbrough aren't winning football matches, I become a much snappier person. So anytime Nathan tries to send me one of these jokey texts, largely he gets a response of 2 words, and one of them starts with F and the other one starts with off.
So yeah, sent you that text, and I think that those were actually the words in response. And I said, "No, I'm being serious. Like, I actually think this is true." Anyway, we stood in the fan zone before the game yesterday, and yeah, no Rav and no Ben Doak. Absolute killer, really. We discussed at length last week in the Norwich sort of assessment that the game changed, of course, on the penalty miss, but also on the substitutions, which were removing Doak for Jones. And now we had to have Jones start the game yesterday against Coventry, which was less than ideal from a Middlesbrough fan's perspective, who had seen Ben Doak tear apart Sheffield United and Norwich last week, and you're hoping that he can make something happen against a side that we definitely don't have the best record against. And yeah, unfortunately, he was out of the squad completely. We've been told it was a hamstring issue. Hopefully, he'll be okay for Tuesday night. Fingers crossed, if I'm honest. Fingers crossed he'll be okay for Tuesday and next Saturday, and then there's an international break where
He'll go away with Scotland, so he'll
he'll
play
go.
even more games.
Yeah, you want no rest for the wicked, unfortunately. But yeah, a couple of changes to the team anyway. Dyke Steele dropped out the side as well, didn't he? And Luke Ayling came back in. Obviously, Clark come back into the side in the absence of Rav. Dieng kept his place despite a few boo boys on Twitter calling for his position to be swapped out. But I think that was sort of confirmed anyway that he'd be playing with Bryn playing for the under-21s on Wednesday night.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, with the Dieng conversation, listen, I know we briefly touched on it last week, and I know a few other Borough podcasts that I listen to touched on it as well and had the conversation, because it is one of them where you look at kind of his save percentage and shots faced versus what he's conceded, and he's right kind of at the lower rankings of some of those lists. But I think we're a little bit off, and as you say, we kind of knew, both from the fact that Bryn played, as you say, during the week, but also because of Carrick's comments, he kind of made it clear that at the moment, Senny Dieng's still going to be his number one. I think the main thing was, and I guess more so the worry midweek going into the game, and obviously in the same breath as Rav, the way it was confirmed, we'd heard or seen the comments from Carrick midweek about how many games Doak's played in a row, how it was important that he's rested, and obviously he had a big injury last season and he's still very young. And some people had even kind of said after those comments, is this just like a preparation so that when the inevitable sort of bombshell drops at 2 o'clock on Saturday that he's not playing, that we're all kind of half expecting it? And I thought, no, there's absolutely no chance it would have been acknowledged. But no, it wasn't. And to not be in the squad, you think it's got to be more than a tweak or more than being rested. Because like the point that I made to you yesterday, if he was always going to be rested, then there was no need for him to come off at Norwich. So it sounds ridiculous, but I almost hope that it was a knock which kept him out of the game rather than being just rested. Because if he was rested, I don't even want to get into it, to be honest. So, yeah, look, we've seen the team without Rav and Doak. Obviously, that meant Isaiah Jones coming to the team. There was obviously the conversation we had about him last week, and it was a big opportunity. Clark, it didn't, not to say that it didn't bother me, but you kind of expect a certain level of performance with Clark. You always know that you're not probably going to be let down. And it wasn't the case. You know, he did an absolutely fine job yesterday. Of course, the whole complexion of the game changes on the red card, doesn't it? But in terms of the performance, even at 11v11, we were second best to everything. Coventry, bear in mind, and I know you can't look or watch a football match and just think this team's higher in the league table than that team, so the team higher in the league table will wipe the floor. That's not the way football goes. But considering Coventry were a team who haven't won away all season, have struggled for the most part since really the first ball of the season was kicked, they haven't found any kind of consistency. The first real sort of turning a corner point in their season was getting that result last week against Luton. And obviously you felt Borough, given the way that last week at Norwich ended, would come out the traps fast and basically try and, you know, not get the game wrapped up early, but put Coventry under an amount of pressure where if you can get the first goal, it becomes a really, really difficult game at the Riverside with a strong home base. Obviously, we should mention there was no red going on. It was no more red campaign. And I just want to say, in terms of the kit, I know the whole message around it is really important. And I don't even think we need to have the conversation about the message. It's a good message. Anyone that was complaining about it, I really don't understand. It's a one-off game. It's not the change of the kit forever. It's promoting something that's very, very topical and very, very important in the area. So the idea behind it, all on board with. It was a really important message. The irony that it was no more red and then we got a red card was as typical Boro as it could possibly get. But my major thing about the kit in general, just whilst I'm being sidetracked, why is that kit not going to be made available? Because even if it had been 50-50 in terms of charitable donations and then 50% going to the club, those would have absolutely flown off the shelves or the racks or whatever they get sold on in the club shop. For the life of me, I don't understand that decision. I would have bought one and I would have paid a lot of money to get one because I've always wanted a really just basic all-white kit for Middlesbrough. But yeah, I'm waffling, Nathan, and I'm probably waffling just to try and not talk about the actual football. But anyway, we were second best. Coventry were making us look like the team that were lower down the table. And actually, again, ironically enough, I thought that we did marginally improve when we went down to 10. We just looked second best, sluggish. Coventry had more impetus in the game. They were trying to get balls into the box almost as a first instinct. It kind of seemed like with Thomas Asante and Haji Wright, the type of players they are, they feed off balls into the box. And it was like an instruction. You've seen it from minute one. Van Ewick and Radoni, who was playing as the left and right wing backs, it was, if you've got an opportunity, get it in the box. And yeah, they started on the front foot. We didn't.
Same as every home game, Chris.
Yeah.
It's becoming really, really poor and frustrating to watch Middlesbrough at the Riverside. And this isn't like a just this season thing. This is a continuation of last season as well. I'd actually seen a tweet this morning from Chris Boro UTB on Twitter, and he'd said that the home form last season was we won 10 games, drew 4 and lost 9. And this season so far, won 3, drawn 2 and lost 2. So we're losing. We pretty much we've lost 2 less games than we've won. And that's just totally unacceptable for a team that wants to be anywhere near the top of this division. You need to build a solid foundation at home and pick up the majority of your points at home against the teams that are in and around the mid-table or lower half of the division. And again, yesterday we go into the game and start incredibly slowly, just playing passes within our own half. Lack of movement in the final third is really, really poor. And there's just no intent at all to get after a team when they come to the Riverside. It almost seems, and I think I'm just repeating myself from pretty much most home games when we talk about home games, and that is simply that we just sort of expect that we will break down the door eventually with our slow, methodical triangles without any sort of pace or conviction to our attacks. I just think that we're really, really poor at home.
Yeah, we are, and the stats are there to back it up. It's become a real issue, as you say, over a long period of time now. It's not just this season, and to be honest, I think other than the red card, the moment which summed up the performance in general, and especially the first half performance, was The ball got passed out wide to Isaiah Jones. And for weeks we've been saying, please try and get at your man. Be more direct. Be more like Ben Doak. And he tried to run up the line. And I think with his second touch, just kicked it out of play. And at that point, I thought, oh, God. I miss Ben Doak. And, I said last week, I don't want to be too harsh. There was countless sort of poor performances yesterday, but all I'll say is I can't wait until Marcus Forss is available. If Doak's not going to be available, Isaiah Jones just needs a kind of... He's had a prolonged period out the team, but I'm not saying I don't want him in the squad, but I think I'm just at the stage now where it just feels like I don't think Isaiah Jones has ever really, in terms of the formation that Michael Carrick plays, has ever really put on a performance or consistent performances from the right of that three behind a striker where I think, yeah, he could be our right winger. I think, honestly, and I think a lot of people have said it for a while now, I look at Isaiah Jones and think, probably a good right wing back. He's not a right winger. In terms of what Carrick wants in his system and what he wants from a right winger, in terms of being involved in the possession, being involved in the even just the movement side of things in terms of attacking phases of play, I just don't think he has the sort of capacity to be able to play that role. And it's sad, but for me, he's a wing back. And Marcus Forss played during the week. I know you mentioned about Sol Brynn, but if it's not going to be Doak, then play someone else there. Because I'm almost, unfortunately, and it sounds really harsh, and I hope he proves me wrong, but I'm kind of done with Isaiah Jones's kind of won't he ever kind of find that form again. And look, I've almost gone off on one there, and it's probably harsh because there's so many of them that you could pick out yesterday and think they're just not at a level or weren't at the level yesterday where we need them to be, really. But he was quite an obvious sort of weak point in the team. Let's just get on to it, Nathan. Hayden Hackney's first yellow card. There's no complaints about it for me. The Coventry player skips past him and he drags him back. It initially comes from a poor first touch. It's become, again, a common theme that Hayden Hackney does tend to pick up quite regular bookings. And this was actually a theme when he first came into the team as well. And it almost went under the radar that he picked up quite a lot of bookings, just from cheap fouls more than anything. Just from not necessarily lapses in concentration, but kind of just almost sometimes getting caught out a little bit positionally and just taking one for the team or just stepping across someone and being a little bit cynical. And this season, I've seen some stats yesterday about the amount of yellow cards that Hayden Hackney picks up, especially in terms of in the first half of games. And it's a bit of a worry because you think in terms of being a combative midfielder in a position where, the majority of play goes through the majority of our build-up, and obviously in terms of his defensive responsibilities as well, picking up yellow cards in the first half, you've still got the majority of the game to go. And like we saw yesterday, you miss time one tackle and you're putting yourself at risk of being sent off and giving your team a disadvantage, a major disadvantage. And yesterday, look, the second tackle, he does get a nick on the ball. 10 years ago, it probably wouldn't have been a yellow card. Now, it's a yellow card. I've got no real complaints. You've got a question for me, Hackney, being on a yellow card. I know it's part instinct when you're playing, and if he thinks he can get there and he's really confident, then he's going to try. And probably instinct's just taking over. But if you're on a yellow card, you'd like to hope that he just kind of almost lets him go by and just takes a step back and kind of thinks, do you know what? Let him take it, because I'm better off letting Clark or Edmondson try and deal with it rather than getting myself sent off. And yeah, there's been complaints. I do understand them to a certain extent, but you're putting yourself at risk. And for me, to be honest, it's a yellow card anyway. He does get a nick on the ball, but in the modern game, whether or not I agree with the sentiment about the modern game and what constitutes a yellow card is a different story. But if we're just looking at it in black and white, is it a yellow card in the current game? Yeah, it probably is. Was the first one a yellow card? Yeah. It's a silly tackle to make when you're already on a caution.
Yeah, just plain and utter stupidity, really. First one, as you say, it's his own doing. His first touch is poor, loses the ball, drags the lad back, nailed on yellow card every day of the week. Second one, dives in, puts high, and look, he doesn't make a whole lot of contact with Thomas Asante's leg, but it's the lunge, and
Yeah.
he's desperate and out of control trying to get the ball. Yeah, as you were mentioning about his yellow card stats, I found the tweet here. 5 first half yellows in his last 7 games. Really poor. Really, really poor. You can't legislate for it, really.
Some of them needlessly cheap yellow cards. And I do appreciate in that position, you saw it countless times with Adam Clayton in Middlesbrough sides where unfortunately in that role, sometimes you've got to take one for the team. But in the first half of games, you think almost that those yellow cards should be coming in this. I know you can't kind of think I can only get booked in the second half. That's a ridiculous way of thinking. But to get booked that consistently in the first half of games, I don't know if it's a lack of concentration or it's almost, well, I feel quite confident playing with a yellow. So even if I take one, it's not the end of the world. But you're putting yourself in a position like he did yesterday where you potentially one mistimed tackle away or one not even necessarily mistimed, one slightly out of control challenge, and you're getting your marching orders. And look, it's something that we have to talk about because it does affect the game. But I actually don't want to try and get sort of too drawn up on the red card as a whole, because although it changes the game and it means Azaz comes off the pitch and Howson comes on, it's not like we were battering Coventry and then got the red card and it changed the whole kind of view of the game or the look of how things were going. We were already the worst side in the game. And to be honest, had Hayden Hackney have even stayed on the pitch, I thought the goal was coming.
Yeah, I mean it was. They'd scored 2
Yeah.
before the actual one that counted does go in. Yeah. Asante, which looked marginal, scores 1, and then Wright scores 1, which that one actually was offside. I did see that one on the replays. But yeah, it was coming anyway. And eventually, after as you said, we sort of got a little bit better, weirdly, after the red card. But yeah, that soon sort of fizzled out and they took control of the game again, scored the goal, cross into the box. Having watched it back again, it's sort of a mix-up from our point. Clark actually steps up. Edmondson is slightly deeper, and then on the back post, Neto's asleep. Plays all 3 players in in Coventry shirts, stood in the 6-yard box, plays them all onside, and in floats Bobby Thomas, and he can't miss. Free header from about 5 yards. Goal, game over. Might as well have gone home. So yeah,
Yeah. That was the most frustrating part for me where, look, don't get me wrong, there was probably a spell just before Coventry actually got the second where we were actually slightly drawn into it. And in terms of minor positives, great to see Johnny Howson back on the pitch, apart from his massive scare where he nearly gives Haji Wright the easiest goal he'll ever score. It was good to see him back on the pitch, and he didn't really look kind of anything other than his usual sort of level. Aidan Morris was very good, and given that he was playing with Howson for the first time, his performance was really positive. Given that sometimes there was an overload, or quite a lot of the times there was an overload in midfield. And I actually thought that Riley McGree and Tommy Conway basically just ran themselves into the ground, and you can't really ask for much more. Tommy Conway he had one chance that gets blocked from a Coventry kind of lapse of concentration. But other than that, yeah, ran himself into the ground, and that's all you can do when you've got the man disadvantage. He did all he could, and yeah, couldn't ask for much more. But in terms of the feeling of inevitability, the feeling of capitulation, look, we did well to stay in the game as long as we did. But even still, it comes back to the point that we made last week and with the Watford game. There was inevitability about what was going to happen in the game. And also, when Coventry got the second, and you can kind of account for it because we're pushing bodies forward and it's going to allow them the potential to counter-attack. That word capitulation again. I mean, don't get me wrong. Even after the first, I knew that was game done. At the very, very least, and I didn't have any confidence at all. I thought we might get a point, but there was absolutely no chance that we were going to win the game. And then after the second, well, I actually was pleasantly surprised that it only finished 3, to be honest. But in terms of the broader sort of conversation around Middlesbrough and where we're at with this season, and kind of regardless of the sending off, regardless of kind of how well we did to stay in the game up until it went 2, the facts are that as of now, we're now 2 points worse off than we were at this stage last season. Now, given the recruitment, given the tools that Michael Carrick has at his disposal, and given the players that we kept at the football club this summer, we were all under the assumption that if it wasn't going to be automatic, and I don't think many really thought, we're going to walk the league. I don't think anyone's saying that by any stretch. But there was kind of almost an understanding or a collective expectation that Middlesbrough, at the very minimum, and given the tools that Michael Carrick has, there was an expectation level that we will be within the playoffs. It was, the not the excuses as such, but he's got that much at his disposal. We can't afford a slow start. And, we've got to improve. We have to improve. He's got all of the options. The injuries kind of cleared up. And to be in a position where, as I say, we're 2 points worse off now than what we were last season, that's just inexcusable for me.
Yeah, it's not great. The sort of only thing that I'd sort of say is, and look, it's not a guarantee that this comes. We found some consistency around this time last season, didn't we? And we did go on a little bit of a run throughout October and November. I think didn't we win 7 games in a row or something daft like that?
Yeah, it was, and that might happen. But if we're just talking as in the here and now, and the fact is, you can kind of, this is the thing with context. You can look at it from the point of what I've just mentioned about being worse off than we were last season. You can also look at it from the perspective of we're only 3 points off the playoffs. For me, looking at it that way, yeah, I can see why people would. People, glass half full, glass half empty. It depends what type of person you are. But that is more of a reflection of the quality of the league this year compared to last year. Teams were already starting to run away with things last season. This season, we're still chasing the pack, that's not inexcusable, but it's underwhelming. I think that would be fair to say. And I just, look, again, in terms of me using the word inexcusable, I don't think it's reactionary because, we're very soon going to be a quarter of the way through the season. And yes, there's still a lot of football to play. As you say, we could still go on a really good run. But the facts are that we're playing the kind of, let's try and catch up again. And at the moment, there's nothing that I've seen in terms of, from a decent amount of games, from a good amount in terms of basing it off a sample size, that this season really is going to be anything other than just kind of, we'll take 2 steps forward and then probably 3 back. It seems very much that we just can't seem to find any form of consistency. And for me, I look at things right now and think, well, like I said in the last podcast, it's not good enough. Do I want to change manager? No, I don't. No, I actually don't, because, well, partly because there's no one else out there that I would. There's not really any names which jump out, and I mean, it's not like we're going to go and take a manager from someone else. Steve Gibson doesn't work like that. But it's not just that. You know, we've seen we play nice football with Michael Carrick. There's context around a lot of the games, but quite quickly, as I say, we're going to be a quarter of the way through the season. And in terms of being in a worse position than what we were last season with, I mean, we started the season with Hayden Coulson playing left back. That is just not good enough. Given the recruitment, given the tools that Michael Carrick has, I don't want to change. I want to make that clear. But I'm starting to have certain reservations about if we are just a nearly team. And if we are just going to see the pattern throughout the season where we might well go and actually put 3 wins together and then lose 2 games, for example. And for those 3 games, everyone will be saying, oh, what we were all worried about, this is where we start. But as I say, I've just got reservations about whether it's a case of that we've been found out a little bit from a tactical perspective, whether going back to what we discussed last week with substitutions and Carrick's ability to affect games that way, whether that's hurting us quite a lot. There's kind of different angles you can look at it from. And I worry as well that even with the tools that Michael Carrick has at his disposal, we were at a stage a few years ago where all those loan players went back and we thought, we're going to learn from this. And we're not going to ever become a team that's just reliant on loan players anymore. Well, if you look at it in black and white, without Ben Doak, are we not just a little bit of a one-man band?
Well, I'd probably say no. I think that Doak obviously gives you a hell of a lot in terms of his outlet and from an excitement factor, which we said this before we'd even seen him play a single game, that he was going to bring excitement, and equally alongside that, he will frustrate in games, and we've seen a couple of performances from Doak that reflect that as well with his end product. But I certainly don't think that we're a one-man band. I think that we have a lot of players that are very, very talented. Our midfield two are sublime, fantastic. And ironically, one of them gets sent off yesterday, but we're trying to instill a way of playing that is going to be successful in this division, and those two are going to be pivotal to that. Morris yesterday, even when we went down to 10, I thought he was still really, really good. Just quick, nimble, always knew where his next pass was going to be, never really gives it away, very neat and tidy. And yesterday, I think this, okay, we made the point that we were definitely the worst team in the opening 20-25 minutes before the red card. But yesterday was probably the first game this season where we actually haven't created a chance of much note that I can remember, where we've actually threatened the opposition goal. Now, I think that from my perspective, we're a team that create a lot of chances, but to be successful in this league, you need to be consistent. You need to be consistently good in front of goal and defending your own box as well. And at the moment, we're just a little bit too inconsistent. We said it last week, we said it the week before, the week before, the week before. It's all about finding consistency. And ideally, you get that by not having to chop and change the team too much. We've had to do that again this week with injuries. Hopefully, we have a positive week coming up. Yeah.
I think my frustration comes from the fact, and don't get me wrong, I understand what you're saying with regards to, finding consistency is helps when you've got a consistent team. But it's not like last season where we were struggling to find consistency, and there was a significant drop off. Let's be honest, in terms of quality. If the first kind of 11 or 12 players weren't available, the squad meant that players were playing out of position. There was a drop off in terms of just the level of quality. This season, I don't think you can really use that as an excuse. And in terms of consistency, and just on the point I make about Doak, I actually don't think that that's the case. I don't think that, Doak's just a one-man team because, as you say, we've got other really talented footballers in the team. But from a tactical perspective, you said that we didn't create a chance yesterday. And I know, of course, the red card's taken into consideration again. But up until the Stoke game, when Ben Doak come into the team, chance creation, the front line was a worry in any case. And obviously we were without Riley McGree as well. It's almost like an agreed fact at this point that with McGree and Doak, Boro's chances of winning games increase tenfold. But in terms of just from a tactical perspective, or just in terms of phases of play in the attacking third, a large proportion of Middlesbrough's attacks, and when we went 3-1 up last week, and when we were winning at Watford, there's a common denominator that when Ben Doak's on the pitch, Middlesbrough have been ahead in games, have looked more threatening. So if you take him out of that, and say, for example, it is a long-term injury, that's going to raise its own questions itself. And I'm not suggesting that we wouldn't be able to find answers, but it's a lone player again, and it goes back to the conversation of, is there a bit of an over-reliance on Ben Doak as a lone player? Possibly. That's kind of its own topic in itself. But in terms of a broader perspective, I just worry, again, going back to the reason why we can't find this consistency. And as I mentioned, it's a completely fair point that having the 11 players that you want to play each week on a consistent basis is only going to help with the consistency. But it's not like, for example, Rav comes out the team, Clark comes into the team. Now, yeah, they're slightly different players, but there's not an obvious drop-off in quality there at all, is there, really?
No, not from that perspective. But then the point is, you take Doak out the team and you replace him with Jones. There's the quality drop off. There's a massive quality drop off. If Doak is the messiah, then there's evidently a massive drop off to Jones, which I would agree that there is actually a massive drop off to Jones in terms
of. And do you know what? Completely fair point, because I've even in this podcast I've commented on Jones and kind of where I'm at with him. And yeah, that is a fair point. Obviously, we're going to have Marcus Force available soon. Michael Carrick clearly views him as a player on the right flank. That's just kind of a given now. So we're going to have him as an option as well. But in terms of the kind of, again, broader perspective of things, even if there is an over-reliance on Doak, or there is an obvious drop-off in the quality of Doak to Jones, for the remainder of the team, that still shouldn't probably have as much of an impact as what it potentially is having. And it comes back to the tactical perspective of, are we a little bit predictable? Are we a little bit too easy to play against?
Yeah.
Look, I'm throwing almost questions and kind of half my opinion and posing questions to you and people that are listening. By all means, we love to hear kind of everyone else's perspective, because as we always say, we're both fans again, but I just look at it for what it is now, and we're in a worse position than we were last season. You've got 2 games coming up against Luton and QPR where for the most part, again, another common theme under Carrick throughout his tenure is that we've struggled against teams lower down the division. And you look at them now and think, going into the international break, I don't think, and it's not a level of expectation, I think you've got to win both games, because you're looking at our last kind of however many games. It's 1 win in 5.
Yeah.
It's not good enough.
Yeah, it's not, you're right, and I agree with your point on Dork. I think that you're right in what you're saying. We can't be a team that is so over reliant on one player that as soon as you take him out, it all falls apart, and you just can't attack. Yeah, I think obviously yesterday it's probably one to just write off in terms of you go down to 10 men, and like I always speak to my granddad after the game, and he'll read the Gazette and the Northern Echo's ratings of players, and he said, "Oh well, there was sixes and fives yesterday." I was like, for the players that were left on the pitch from minute 20 onwards, you can't ask anything more from them really than to run the legs into the ground and try and just keep the score to a minimum.
Yeah, yeah.
You're playing against a side there that are absolutely buoyed with confidence after coming back from a 2-goal deficit last week. Obviously, get a massive plus point on their performance yesterday with Hackney's red card early on in the game, and from then on, as soon as they got that goal before half time, it's game done, and they just have to see that out. Yeah, I think that's one to write off yesterday, but now going into a week with two games before an international break again, QPR don't want to jinx it, winless at home,
As Coventry were away
as
from home going
as
into
com
yesterday.
exactly, and Luton, who look, I half thought that they were turning a corner with the win over Watford a couple of weeks ago, their little derby game, then going to Coventry, getting beaten that game, and then they played West Brom on Friday night. Chris, it was 1-1, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
you're right. It was the
but
Friday night game.
yeah, the reaction wasn't all too positive towards Rob Edwards. So look, you've got two massive, and I mean massive, opportunities this week to string a little bit of consistency together. It one in terms of your results, but also in terms of a performance level. And I just hope that we can go in, sort of just wipe a clean slate from this weekend, just to forget about it, and go into this game on Tuesday night at Loftus Road, 11 v 11, play our usual game, and hopefully find different methods to be able to break down what will likely be a low block.
Yeah, it's going to be, isn't it? And it's going to be in both games. So there in itself lies a challenge for Michael Carrick and his team to basically go out and make a statement and say, this has been thrown at us all season, that we can't break down teams that basically just sit in and are happy for us to have the ball. Basically, there's 6 points. We've shown that we have got a plan B. Whether I think that will be the case and whether I think largely we do have a plan B, I'm not so sure about, if I'm honest. But again, going back to Doug, a large kind of element of his performances and the conversation slightly shifted from the conversation shifted to we can't break teams down at all to we're creating things and we can't put chances away. And that conversation changed once Doak had been basically added into the starting 11. So everything crossed that he's going to be available, because he'll, without doubt, help in terms of breaking down, as you say, a team that will sit in a low block. Even at home, they will, given the position that they're in. Look, I think, as you say, I almost, this podcast, I know we'll title it or put in the description that we're discussing or reviewing Coventry. But to be honest, even after the game yesterday, it wasn't so much that performance or the result which has angered me. It's the position where we find ourselves in. And those games, to be fair, happen over the course of a season. Sometimes you get a man sent off and you've kind of got to, and sometimes really successful teams, they'll find a way to nick a point from games like that. I mean, we saw in the season when Wolves had an abundance of quality and one of the best championship teams ever. They went through games where, even at the Riverside, they had 2 sent off and they still managed to win the game. But I think my frustration is largely, I'm happy to write that game off, but I'd be more happy to write that game off when, leading up to those games, we hadn't had the results like Bristol City. We hadn't had the results like Preston. We hadn't had the throwing away points at Watford and Norwich. And yeah, I think it's, for the first time, I've got a few reservations as to whether we are actually ever going to turn the corner. Because for the most part of this season, I've always thought that, yeah, it's frustrating, but we will turn a corner. And as you say, similarly, last season, not for kind of the remainder of the season as such, but for a 7-game spell or whatever it was, we did find that consistency. And then the injuries kicked in and kind of derailed that a little bit. But in terms of where we're at with the squad, again, going back to the recruitment, I don't think you can really pose that many questions at the recruitment team about kind of the tools that Michael Carrick has to work with, the options that are available to him. I think a lot of questions will be posed of Michael Carrick, and I do think, look, I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit, but going into the international break, if you don't get, let's say, 4 to 6 points, I think at that point, as I say, you are pretty much or definitively at the quarter way mark of the season. And given the resources that were spent, given the players that we kept at the football club, I think you would. I honestly do think you'd be under quite a lot of pressure if we weren't to go and get between 4 and 6 points going in the international break.
Quite possibly. I think that will sort of depend on the performances as well.
Yeah.
And how we go about things in those games. But yeah, if we end up throwing in a performance like we did away at Watford, yeah, it won't be very good on the socials or in the ground
Or on this podcast.
or on this podcast next weekend. So yeah, well, look, we'll just have to wait and see. I'm happy to still sort of remain quite upbeat, which is quite strange for me.
I honestly don't know what's gotten into you this season, Nathan. I really don't.
Yeah, I think I just still see that there is a lot of talent within this squad. That there is a manager that is, look, he's had a season and a half now, but he's still finding his way, and I do have a lot of faith that we will get there, and I can see a lot of positive signs. Sort of just ignoring yesterday's game, just pretend it just didn't happen, because they were getting 3 points off us anyway, and they'll have another 3 points off us in May as well. So just completely just forfeit the games. There's no point playing them. We've got a lot of talented players, and it will come good. And I'll be sat here next week, pint in hand, 6 out of 6 points, and we'll be sat in the playoffs, Chris. So don't worry about that.
No, but I mean, because I've posed a lot of questions, and I'm going to pose another one. In terms of, as you say, in terms of there's been signs, and it's undoubtedly the case that there is quality in this side, but what is actually, in terms of from what, and I'm not kind of, I don't want you to think I'm phrasing this in a way of what are you seeing that everyone else isn't, because I do see the positives and I do see that we've got a lot of quality. And I don't think it would be out of the realms of possibility that we do go and string a couple of wins together. But at the moment, we haven't even won 2 games on the bounce yet this season. Now, what are some of the things that, from what you've seen already this year, gives you the confidence that that will happen? Or is it just down to trust in Carrick and basically that we've got quality within the squad?
There is that, but even I'd just refer everyone to probably from minute 15 at Norwich last weekend to watch from minute 15 to the end of the first half, and then come back to me and we'll have a conversation, because that was Middlesbrough at their potential that we are talking about, playing neat, intricate passes with intent to get forward, direct wingers, the left back attacking down that side, putting crosses into the box, a forward who has, in that instance, 2 chances in that game and takes those chances. Players that, in Dork's instance, so exciting to watch driving forward. Direct will always have the beating of any fullback in the division. I think he'd have even beat Van Eyck for pace yesterday, who was like an absolute road runner in the instances that we'd seen him yesterday. But yeah, I think that we've got a lot of things to be encouraged about despite yesterday's results, and I think that an opening half an hour, 45 minutes on Tuesday night will be enough to make me either very optimistic for the rest of the week and the Luton game and the second half of Tuesday night, or it'll make me feel a little bit flat and think, yeah, that okay, maybe my sort of eternal optimism needs to be toned down a little bit. I think that it'll be really interesting to see how we begin the game on Tuesday night. It simply cannot be lethargic, slow, methodical. It has to be right. We need to get at these, and from minute one, try the absolute best to break them down within that first half.
Yeah, yeah. I almost don't know what would be more satisfying, just kind of blowing a team apart and putting 5 past them, or just an absolutely scruffy 1-0. Because both are questions that have kind of been posed of this Middlesbrough team this season. We kind of saw from, as you say, the spell from 15 minutes onwards to half time at Norwich that we can blow a team away. But I guess probably the major question marks are basically, do this Borough team have enough nous, have enough game management to basically see a game out, and look, you could throw the West Brom game at me and say, you took the lead, you defended well, and you saw the game out. But yeah, I honestly think these are 2 really, really, really big fixtures for Middlesbrough Football Club and Michael Carrick going forward. And look, I've posed questions on this podcast. It doesn't, again, I just want to reaffirm, it doesn't change my opinion on that Michael Carrick has banked more than enough faith from fans that, you know, to suggest a change of manager at this current moment is still crazy to me. But I can also, from the standpoint of people that have had or are beginning to have reservations or are beginning to question if we can put a string of wins together and aren't just going to be a nearly team, factoring in the context of what's available to Michael Carrick, I see both sides. So look, we'll see where we are at the end of next week. It's 2 teams where, as we say, we're expecting low blocks, come and break us down. We'll try and nick a counter-attack, or failing that, you might just gift us a couple of goals, because you have done for the most part this season. So it's 2 more games. It'll take us to, as I say, the quarter-way mark pretty much in the season. And to be honest, there hasn't been all too much talk about the goals yesterday. I don't even think they really need to be covered because towards the back end of the game, we're chasing the game a little bit. We've got 10 men. They're not disgraceful by any means in terms from a defensive perspective. As you say, Coventry were probably going to win the game anyway before even Hayden Hackney was sent off. But nonetheless, there needs to be a reaction, and there needs to start being considerable and consistent signs and evidence to point towards the fact that Middlesbrough aren't an early team and that they can be, basically a top championship team, because there's no doubt in my mind that there's enough quality within that squad that they can be. And that's where I'm at, kind of thing.
100%. Yeah. Look, we've said it. It's all about consistency. We need to find our rhythm in both boxes, defensively and obviously scoring goals. We need to find our rhythm at doing both of those things. And that's what the top teams in this division and any division are made of, really. Strong foundations and at the top of the pitch, that bit of quality. And there's no doubt that with the personnel there, that this should be a team of individuals that can bond together to be a successful team in this division. There's no doubt about that. So it begins on Tuesday night, Chris.
Yeah, it does. I don't know if this feels like a long or short podcast. I feel like it's been a bit of a roller coaster where I've gone to completely lose my head, come back down to earth a little bit. I don't know if there's anything else or any performances or team-wise or anything like that you want to discuss. But obviously we're at a point where we kind of all know what outfits QPR and Luton are. We know the qualities that they possess, or especially Luton, we know the players. We saw them play week in, week out in the Premier League last season. They've got two big lumps up front that are quite effective footballers in this division. Like it or not, the style argument, we've seen that they cause teams problems and they are effective. Whether they have been as effective this season or whether they've been figured out, again, that's a different question in itself. But yeah, Nathan, is there anything else you want to add, or are you happy to just draw a line under the podcast and draw a line under Coventry and just open that can of worms again in May?
Yeah, I don't want to think about them pretty much, ever again, pretty much. But yeah, we'll get to May and reconvene for more fun and games with the Sky Blues.
Yeah, I think that's unfortunately the point that we're going to have to end on. Just the words "the Sky Blues" is enough to give any Borough fan nightmares these days, isn't it? Look, we're in this position. As I say, God, it could be a whole lot worse. It could be a whole lot better. It's wearing a little bit thin, these types of performances at the moment, as you can probably tell from myself. But there's an opportunity there. And we're going into the international break where we're going to have an opportunity to rest and kind of recuperate and assess where we're at. And I think these next two games are going to answer an awful lot of questions. So we'll wait for that podcast and we'll see where we are then. For the meantime, though, that has been another episode of the Boropolis podcast. Please do like and subscribe on YouTube. Do give us a rating or a review on your audio platforms. And thanks again for listening. We'll see you next week, everyone. I hope it's a lot more positive. That's been another episode of the Boropolis podcast.